Well, hello again. Welcome to another Reflected Reality Simulations video. My name's Graham. This is X-Plane and the Hot Start Challenger 650. This is part 3 of the tutorial flight, and today finally we're going to get the engines up and running and go flying in the airplane. It's taken us a bit longer to get here because we're going through everything in slow time, but really you can do this in about 20 to 25 minutes if you're doing it at normal pace. Before we look at actually flying the aircraft though, just a couple of controls that we might want to have bound on our control systems to make life a little bit easier. The first one that I really like is the sync button. It's on the back of the yoke here, just this little button here, so I have that bound on my joystick. And there's also been some questions about the toga and autothrust disconnect buttons. Now, if you're flying a 737 or any other airplane with this kind of layout, it looks initially like it'll be very sensible, except the autothrust disconnect button is this one here, and the toga button is this one here, so it's back to front compared to the Boeing aircraft. There's also been some questions about whether or not you have to have the left and right buttons bound. You notice that my disconnect, it's only the left button that's happening. Well, that's quite simple. The buttons do the same job. Each individual button will disconnect both levers. It's really because if you're flying it with your right hand on the levers, i.e. you're sitting in the left-hand seat, then this is your thumb and this is your forefinger. But if you're sitting in the other seat, this is your forefinger and your thumb is on the other side. So it's really dead straightforward in that respect. You only need to have one bound. You notice with me messing around that I've lost my autothrust indications here, and if I push toga, I don't get them back. It doesn't matter how many times I push toga, the autothrust indications won't come back. The reason for that is quite simple. It'll only power up the ATS systems if the flight directors are not on when you push toga. So if I select the flight directors off and then push toga, you get N1 takeoff as well as the flight directors back again. If you do cycle the flight directors, make sure that you re-engage the modes that you wanted. So there's takeoff and alt. Excellent. Let's make a phone call and get the passengers over here.
Hot Start Flight Support, Jenny speaking. How can we help?
Hey Jenny, can you send the passengers over please?
Understood. They'll be there in a couple of minutes. Anything else?
No, that's good, thanks.
Always a pleasure. Take care.
Excellent. With the passengers on the way, we'll have a quick look at the cabin, make sure everything's set how we'd want it to be. All the window blinds are up. Check the passenger information display here, it's got something sensible. And we'll go to the galley control panel and we'll switch the lights on as well. We can do that just with the slide out here. We'll put the lights on. If you want more fine-grained control, you can go into the light options here and have a look at the different lights that we can switch on and off on the Challenger. But really, this slide out should be enough to get going. Having done that, whilst we're waiting for the passengers, we'll take a quick look outside, the last minute idiot check. Make sure that I've taken the pins out of the gear and the chocks are out. Have a look around the front, make sure all the probe covers are off. We've still got chocks on the nose gear, that's fine. Make sure that the AC power receptacle door is closed and latched. Come over here and make sure that the fuel hose connector and the fuel control panel is latch closed as well. Make sure nobody's opened that. So the reason we've got chocks in the nose gear is to protect the ground crew. We're going to leave those chocks for the ground crew to deal with. Because as long as they're plugged in on the headset, they want some method to protect themselves as well. So we're counting on the aircraft parking brake working. But the ground crew are going to use these chocks to make sure the aircraft doesn't try and run them over. So we'll leave those chocks for them. Excellent. Let's get back on board and hopefully the passengers will be here soon. Oh, there we go. Excellent service. Let's jump in the seat and give them a chance to sit down on the aircraft. And this is one of these immersion features that you don't often get in sims. This is all happening by itself. I don't need to trigger anything for this to happen. It just leads, basically allows you to remain in that role as a jet pilot. You can sometimes hear the passengers come up the stairs as well.
Hello, Captain. How are you today?
Doing fine, thank you. How are you?
That's great to hear.
Okay.
Well, we're all set back there, so we can get going anytime.
Excellent. These will be my regular passengers, so we don't have cabin crew on board today. I'll close the doors. So use the assist handle here. And then we'll latch the door, lift the flap here, and pull the handle to retract the handle. Notice it goes green on there. So no cabin crew. The passengers are mostly familiar with the aircraft, but I do want to play the safety presentation for them. That's the commander's responsibility to make sure they get that. So I'm going to select it from here. We'll do that.
Ladies and gentlemen, if we may please have your attention.
If we don't want it to be too loud for them,
Would like to welcome you aboard this.
we'll turn it down just a little bit for them. Right, let's get in the seat. I'll get the heads-up display because I'm not going to get up again, and we'll start the checklist. Here we go.
Engine start checklist. Doors. Closed. Parking brake and pressure. Checked and set. Fuel quantity and balance.
So you'll notice that the first officer is checking the items automatically now. He's not waiting for me to confirm. So once we've got the engine start checklist and beyond, the FO will check the actions for us. We still have to do them. Until we actually start moving the aircraft, we have to do the actions ourselves. The fuel quantity and balance, yeah, that's fine. That's not a problem at all. That's balanced.
Checked. Beacon.
We'll switch the beacon on. It's up here.
On. Fuel boost pumps.
We're going to put both of the boost pumps on.
On. Ignition.
System A today.
Armed. Engine 2 start.
So the start is dead easy. I'm going to pop out the MFD here, and we'll start the engine, first of all, by double checking with the ground crew if it's okay to start the engines. So 2 fingers and 1 rotating finger. And he confirms that it's okay to start. Now the ground crew are checking to make sure that the aircraft is in a suitable state for flight. So if you've left the probe covers on, or you've left the pins in, they won't give you that thumbs up. That's another line of defense to stop you from doing something silly. But it's all good today, so push and start. Hold the switch until the start light comes on. Check that I've got oil pressure. Check I've got N2. So N2 is 20, less than 120 ITT, N1's turning, engine fuel on. Check that we've got fuel flow, ITT, and oil pressure. And then it's just a case of waiting for the engine to stabilise. At 55%, the start light will go off, and this hint image will disappear, but let's wait till it fully stabilises.
Fuel system.
So, here we go. Start light's off, and we're looking for stabilisation. It's just a case of checking the first digits here. 2, 4, 6, and then 2. If it's pounds, it'll be 2464. But 2, 4, 6, 2. So the fuel system on the Challenger is interesting, and we have to check it in this case. So look at the study menu, engines, fuel system. These are the boost pumps, and these are the engine pumps here. And we've got 2 check valves in the system. These check valves make sure that fuel pressure from the right hand side cannot flow across onto the left hand side, and we need to verify that that's the case. So let me just add some more items to my 2D panel here, and then I'll stack the CAS so that we've got a clear set of messages. As I turn off the boost pumps, watch what happens. I'm going to switch off the right switch, but nothing happens, because the boost pumps always have to run together. Both boost pumps always run together. All I'm doing by switching that switch off is switching off the monitoring on the engine pump. So if the engine pump isn't making pressure, the boost pumps will take over as long as that switch is in. Let me switch off the other one. And now both pumps go off. But because the pumps are off when they should be on, I've got right fuel pump and left fuel pump indications in op. But most importantly, I've got left fuel low pressure, and that's what I'm looking for. That is telling me that the right engine is not pressurizing the left side of the fuel system. So that's the checks complete. We'll put the pumps back on. Now, you may have noticed that we've only checked that one way, and the simple answer is that we check the other way on shutdown. Let's confirm that item.
Checked. Engine 1 start.
So we'll ask the ground crew, is it okay to start number 1? 1 finger and 1 rotating finger. They confirm it's good to start, so same action, push and hold start. Check we've got fuel flow, check we've got oil pressure, N2 is increasing, less than 120, N1's turning, fuel on, get fuel flow, ITT, and oil pressure. Again, waiting for 55%.
Engine start checklist complete. After start checklist, next.
Now I should point out that you can do anything you want manually on this aircraft. You don't have to use the automation features, you don't have to use the first officer, but for me it really adds to the immersion because it's much more realistic working that way. Before we do the after start checklist, let's get rid of the ground crew, so I tell them to take the chocks out.
Ground to cockpit. Chocks have been removed.
Excellent. So they're going to go away now. So they're walking away from the aircraft, they can take the chocks out and everything's fine. Let's ask for the checklist.
After start checklist. Generator 1 and 2.
So you see that both generator 1 and 2 are off at the moment. We'll switch them on. 1 and 2.
On, checked AC and DC. Ignition.
Again, just doing what they say.
Disarmed. Packs. On. 14th stage.
14th stage is the de-icing side of the bleed system. The 10th stage is pressurization. It's a little bit unusual on the Challenger series that they're split like that, but that's just how they are. So 14th stage left and right open.
Open. Cowl anti-ice.
So it's important not to do anything the checklist doesn't say. You say it says press the switch lights in, start the chrono, and continue the checklist. That means we're going to switch them on and we're going to leave them on. So number 1, or left and right,
45 seconds.
and then start the
Flight
timer.
controls.
Bring up the flight control page here, check the elevators. If I do it in this position here, you might see what I'm doing. Elevators, ailerons, and make sure we've got full control, full movement. And you'll notice as I put aileron in, there's some movement on the rudder on the Challenger as well. That's expected.
Checked. Ground spoilers.
Ground spoilers are here. We're going to go to disarm, make sure the spoilers don't deploy. Go to arm, make sure they do deploy, and go back to auto, make sure that the spoilers stow.
Checked, stowed, auto. Flight spoilers.
I've got a joystick access for this, so we'll go full on the flight spoilers. We get the flight and ground spoilers. We'll go back to 50%, and then we close the spoilers. That's checked.
Checked, stowed. Cowl anti-ice.
So it's been 45 seconds, and we've got cowl anti-ice on cast. That's fine.
Green advisory message on. Supplemental ground wing anti-ice.
We'll switch the test switch on.
Test on. Fuel balance.
We are balanced at the moment. That's reasonable. It's quite close to the limit because I'm doing things a bit slower, but it's still balanced.
Checked. Trims.
We've got suitable nose up trim and aileron and rudders neutral checked.
3 set for takeoff. No steer.
The ground crew are safe. We'll arm the nose steering.
Armed. APR.
APR's down here. I'm going to hold it in position 1. We check that we get APR test OK and APR on the N1 indications, and then check number 2 as well. That's all good.
Checked. Armed. ADG unit.
Hold the switch to unit test for 2 seconds, make sure the light goes off after 2 seconds, and release the switch.
Tested. Supplemental ground wing anti-ice.
And this is the check we have to wait for. We're waiting for the test OK light to come on, and it should come on around about 2 minutes, just under 2 minutes. If that test doesn't say OK, it's OK in this case, we'll switch it off and continue. If it doesn't say OK, it's because you switched off the cowl anti-ice when you weren't supposed to.
Test OK. Cowl anti-ice.
So now we can switch them off.
Off. Wing anti-ice.
And let me bring up the bleed study here again. We'll have a look at the bleed system. Looking at the 14 stage. So what we're intending to do is to check the isolation valves. Let's switch the wing anti-ice switch to norm and watch the anti-ice valves.
Norm. 14 stage isolation valve.
So now there's bleed air getting to the isolation valve, and now I can actuate the valve, make sure that it opens and make sure that it closes. The valve is air driven, so if I didn't switch the wing anti-ice to normal, the valve wouldn't move.
Checked. Wing anti-ice.
So check that we've got wing anti-ice. We do, that's correct. We've got amber indications on the N2, and we've got the indications on the overhead. Move the switch to off and check the lights extinguish.
Check off. ATS. N1 TO. ATC TCAS.
All we need to do is push ATC on here.
TARA. After start checklist complete.
Excellent. Let's
Taxi
get
checklist next.
the CDU up, and we'll get rid of the MFD. Just before we go, there's one final item I want to do for the passengers, is just tell them it's an overwater flight as well. Let's play that PA for them. Right, we'll ask air traffic for taxi permission, and we'll start the checklist.
Taxi checklist. Taxi lights. On. Wing and cowl anti-ice.
We don't need the wing and cowl
Norm
anti-ice.
On or off. Brakes and steering.
So, parking brake released, and then ease off the toe brakes. You'll notice that in the taxi checklist, because we're moving the aircraft, pilot flying is now essentially driving the airplane. The pilot monitoring will do the switch selections. In some cases we have to confirm the actions to make sure they're done, but that's fine. So we're looking for brakes and steering just now. So I'll just give it a little bit of power, get the aircraft moving. Make sure that I've got steering right and steering left. Squeeze the toe brakes, and we can confirm that item.
Checked. Reverse thrust.
So on the first flight of the day, on the Challenger, we have to exercise the reverse thrust. I'll do that once we're out of this parking area here. Let me just put the perf page up here so you can see what the FO is doing with the thrust as well. So hopefully you can see now having the checklist as a read and do style means that you don't have to set out deliberately to learn the aircraft. You can basically get the checklist and focus on one or two systems as you go through it. And although these videos have taken a little bit of time because I'm narrating it as I'm doing it, you should be able to get the entire startup process done in about 15 to 20 minutes. The other thing is with the Challenger, you can save the state once you've done it and everything will be fine at that point. You can just reload that state as you prefer. I've got a separate binding for my thrust reversers, so let's check thrust reverser on the left side. You see I've got rev green. I'll stow it, and then I'll do the right side, rev green, and stow it. So that's the thrust reversers checked. Notice my ATS is flashing fail. If I click ATS disconnect, that's the little button on the front of the thrust levers. I get N1 takeoff back again. That saves me having to cycle the flight directors and reselect the modes. So that check's complete.
Checked. If taxiing the de-ice, pause checklist here until a paper de-ice checklist is complete.
So for an airline pilot to taxi without flaps selected is not normal. Normally you have the flaps selected unless you're taxiing for de-ice. With the Challenger, to keep things simple, and because de-icing really is a capability in the sim here, we start taxi without the flaps, and then once we're off the apron and we know we're not taxiing to the de-icing bay, we can continue the checks.
Flaps. 20. Altimeters. Set and cross-checked. Radar weather. On. Takeoff briefing.
I think we've done that.
Reviewed. Taxi checklist complete. Before takeoff checklist next.
So if you're flying by yourself, your takeoff briefing is just double check you've got 200 knots selected, make sure you've got an altitude selected that's sensible, and make sure that you've got the correct FMAs there. As we're taxiing out, there's nobody at the hold, so we'll continue through the checklist.
Before takeoff checklist. Passenger signs. Advised on. Anti-collision light. On. Probes. On. Windshield heat. On. Wing and cowl anti-ice.
We don't need that.
Norm on or off. Continuous ignition. On. ATC TCAS. TARA. Supplemental ground wing anti-ice panel. Checked. CAS. Takeoff config OK.
So before we confirm the CAS, the next item the first officer will do is turn the lights on. Now, a real first officer would hold the checklist ready for the lights at the appropriate point, but for us, we just hold at the CAS checked OK until we get to the runway lineup, and then we'll tell the first officer confirmed.
Checked. Landing, pulse, recog lights. On. Before takeoff checklist complete. After takeoff checklist next.
Excellent, it's clear on the approach. I don't have the headset on at the moment just so you can hear the sound of the engines on the takeoff. A lot of people, when they look at these videos, want to hear the engines. Of course, it's quite normal to fly with the headset on and it's a little bit muted, but I'll let you hear the engines on the takeoff. So I'll just line up on the runway and we'll hold the aircraft on the toe brakes just for a moment. You'll see that I've got my heads-up display at quite a dim setting, and there's a good reason for that. The rotation on this aircraft can feel a little bit awkward. If I put the heads-up display away, if this was what you're looking at out the window, you'd rotate visually and you'd look at the horizon and you would bring the instrument panel up to meet the horizon. I can check that that's suitable by making sure that my eye position is correct. These balls here, the white and the yellow balls, are called the design eye reference point. And if I move my head up or down, or forwards or backwards, you can see that I can see a little bit more of the yellow ball behind the white ball. So when my eye is in the correct position, the yellow ball is hidden behind the white ball. Now in a sim, it's okay to sit a little bit further back if that's what you prefer, but making sure that your view over the nose is consistent with the design eye reference point is important for going flying. When you're flying with a heads-up display, the temptation is to look at the nose attitude reference here, the V indicator, and pull that up into the air, but it's very difficult to judge the rate in doing that. There's also a few failures that can happen that will cause you to lose the heads-up display if you have a generator go offline, or that sort of thing. So it's important to judge the rotation looking at the horizon and bringing the instrument panel up to the horizon, even if you're flying with the heads-up display. Excellent. There's no run-up needed on the Challenger, there's no stabilization needed, so I'll release the toe brakes and I'll push the lever, our levers forward. You see we get the ATS lights come on. There's 80 knots and M1 hold. There's V1, rotate. Looking at the horizon. Just counting those seconds in my head, bring the nose up to meet the horizon, positive rate of climb, gear up. We can then adjust onto that index marker there. If you're flying on the flight directors, on the PFD, you can see you've got the crossbar or the V-bar, but on the heads-up display, you've got the target for the flight path vector, which is sometimes a little bit harder to fly. Above 400 feet and above VT +5, I'll bring the flaps up. And above 1,000 feet, I'm just going to hold that sync button and just lower my nose attitude to around about 10 degrees. And with it there, I'll just trim for it, about 10 degrees, and I'll gauge the autopilot. So I've got LNAV and pitch with AP. I'll select heading, and we'll turn left onto 120 degrees. You don't need to change the modes, you don't need to change the speed, you don't need to do anything other than just hold that sync button down, lower the nose to about 10 degrees and everything will be fine. The aircraft is on a nice stable flight path at 200 knots with the flaps up. Let's ask for the checklist. And this is just a case of asking for the checklist and mostly watching the first officer do the actions.
After takeoff checklist. Landing gear. Up. Flaps. 0. Thrust reversers. Off. Ignition. Off. Pressurization. Checked. PAX transition. Completed. N1. Climb set. APU generator. Off. APU. Shut down. Passenger signs.
We'll leave the belts on for now.
On, off, or auto. CAS.
And that's checked.
Clear. After takeoff checklist complete.
Excellent. So a nice leisurely departure. I can accelerate up to 250 knots now, or whatever is suitable for your local operating area. You can do that earlier if you want, but I'm trying to emphasize the fact there's no rush to do anything here. And the Challenger is at lighter weight, has a very good climb rate available, but you don't need to use that all the time. See flashing altitude means we're within 1,000 feet, just push the centre of the knob there and that will stop the altitude alerter. And even with only 10 degrees, it's going up to 2,500 feet per minute, capturing nicely at 5,000 feet. So I'm in heading mode at the moment. It was a vectoring departure. Let's go direct to RABIK, and you'll notice when I execute, it doesn't put the aircraft into nav mode automatically, so we still get heading FMAs, so I need to select nav myself. And now what we want to do is to climb up to, I don't know, let's say 7,000 feet. If I was to demonstrate the wrong way to do this, I'm going to dial 7,000 feet, and then I'm going to push flight level change, because that's what you might do in a 737. What I want you to keep in mind is the fact the autothrust and the autopilot have got very limited communication. You can get rated thrust, i.e. full power, idle thrust, or speed mode, and that's it. So I push flight level change and the autothrust goes, right, full power. The problem with full power is that even at these heavy weights, the autopilot cannot pitch up quickly enough to maintain the selected speed. So the aircraft is going to end up 15-20 knots faster than it was supposed to do. We get a very strong climb to bleed the speed back to capture the speed that we wanted. 4,000 feet a minute. Then the speed washes back, we get alt capture. And it just makes for an unpleasant ride for our very expensive passengers. Now it's going to bring the power off to recapture that speed that we had. And that is prototypical to the real aircraft. It doesn't have any finesse on how the autothrust is applied. So the first thing is you don't need to use the autothrust. You could disconnect the autothrust, select flight level change, and just give it a little bit of power. You could use vertical speed mode, and that would be straightforward as well, just VS at 1,500 feet per minute. But my favourite way to do it, let's do another 1,000 feet just to see it. I'll select 8,000 feet, and all I'm going to do is click Alt. That puts me back into pitch mode. I'll push my sync button. I'll just lift the nose to between 7 and 10 degrees. You see the autothrust is responding. It's putting the power on. Release the sync mode there, and it'll climb quite happily. And that's a kind of hands-on way to do it without using the flight control panel. But all of those ways work, whatever works for you. Alt capture. It's a good job we left the seatbelt signs on for the time being. Like the 737, the heading bug doesn't disappear when you're in nav mode. You have to always push the centre of the heading bug to centralise on the aircraft heading. Right, let's say that we get cleared up to cruise, so I'm going to wind my altitude selector up to flight level 380. And again, I'm going to do it my preferred way, so I'm just going to deselect Alt, we get pitch, hold pitch sync, and pull back on the stick. And what I'm trying to do is basically make a nice smooth ride for our VIPs. We want them to book with us again. You can trim when you're holding the sync button as well. And then release sync, and it's good. The only gotcha with the sync button is if you're in heading mode, it won't command the rollout onto heading while you're holding sync down. So just something to be aware of. But, you know, vertical speed works as well. Some operators don't like using vertical speed. Some operators stipulate that you must use vertical speed. It really just depends on what you want to simulate. So above flight level 100, I'll put the landing lights to pulse mode just now. I'll switch them all off at flight level 200. And we should be okay to increase speed. So I'll dial the speed up to about 275 knots, 280, let's say 275. And all I'll do is push that sync button again, lower the nose a little bit, just to about, well, it's very heavy today, so let's say just below 7.5 degrees. Release the sync, and it will capture that pitch attitude. You see the aircraft now accelerate towards 275. People ask about the Vnav capability of the aircraft. It does have Vnav speeds. but to be honest, it's not really worth the effort on the departure. It's much easier just to fly it in selected modes and all will be well. I'm cleared to a flight level, so I'll set standard on the altimeters. And you'll notice that as I get close to the target speed, once the speed's within 5 knots, I can flick to flight level change and it will preserve the existing speed. If it's outside 5 knots, it will reset to the current speed. So here we are, LNAV 1, AP, flight level change, 275 knots, and everything is going fine. We'll switch the seatbelts and the no smoking signs from on to auto. We'll leave them in auto so that in the event of a depressurization, they do the correct action. And that's us. Whilst we're here, we'll have a look at setting the aircraft up for the cruise. I like to have a kind of heads up, heads down mode on the aircraft. So you'll notice that I've got the DCP and CCP up for use on the ground. In flight, I tend to always pop up the MFD on both sides, the CDU, the number 2 CDU, and the DCP and the CCP. And I've got a binding just to make them disappear. So this is me doing pilot stuff, and this is me doing nav stuff. And the first thing you'll note is the checklists are still at the top here. So let's get rid of those. I'll change my upper menu, which is the upper menu, and I'll select that to off. And now I get a full screen map, which is what I was looking for. Just like the left-hand side, the right-hand side, the range is shared between both displays. The same range control controls both. I've got it in plan mode, looking at the aircraft as the center position, but I want to make the map look a little bit nicer as well. So let's use the lower menu, and I'll scroll down to map symbols, and let's put the geopolitical layer on, so we've got some kind of background map, and we could probably have nearest airports as well. Let's put nearest airports on just to give us some situational awareness. And there we've got it. If you want to change where the flight plan is looking, let's just back out of that menu. You can do MFD Advance. So if I click on MFD Advance here, you'll notice that I've got left side and right side. So each CDU control each MFD. So if this CDU wasn't operational, we could just use this one here, and I can skip through the waypoints. Let me zoom it in a little bit so it's obvious what it's looking at. So skip through the waypoints, next, skip through the waypoints previous, and you'll notice that once we get to the runway, the next waypoint it'll center on is the aircraft. So you can use the PPAWS and the plan. I've got PPAWS over here and plan here. And that's how I like it for best situational awareness for me. As I said, there's so much variety in the Challenger. The best thing to do is just find the system that works for you and stick with it. If that changes over time, so be it. Here's flight level 200. We'll switch off the landing lights altogether. Nose lights. Let me get the spot correct. There we go. So lights are off. Passenger signs are auto. We're climbing up to flight level 280 and all is well. Let's skip ahead a little bit in the video. So as a passenger, we've got this lovely flight information display that tells us everything we want to know about the flight. Fully custom simulated for the Challenger, and it's giving you the correct information. It's time zone aware, so the arrival times, the local arrival times are accurate for where you're flying, and it cycles through the various different units just like you've seen on a real flight display. Once we're in the cruise flight, we can bring the curtain over here just to make it look a bit tidier. This is something the cabin crew would potentially do if you were carrying cabin crew. And we can also open the divider up here, or close the divider over, I should say, just to make it a little bit quieter, and then we can chill out on the way back. So there's the altitude alert for 1,000 feet to go. Push the altitude knob here to cancel the warning. I've transitioned onto a Mach 0.76 climb, if you're climbing normally with selected speeds, the transition from IAS to Mach will always happen at 33,600 feet. If you're using the Vnav speeds, which are on the perf page here, if you've got Vnav enabled, you can choose the Vnav plan speed. Well, in that case, it will handle the transition automatically. But doing it in selected mode, which is by far the easiest way to do it, is a manual transfer. But, you know, climbing at 275 knots and 0.76, 0.75, that's fairly reasonable. I said in the early stages of the climb that the autothrust system was not really linked to the autopilot, and that's obvious on the level off as well, because I want to transition from a 0.76 climb to a 0.80 cruise. What would happen if I left it as it is we would capture at 0.76 and it would fly 0.76. I mean, you can just let it do that and let the power come off and put the power back on again, but that's not great for our VIP passengers either. So with about 200 or 300 feet to go, all I'm going to do is deselect FLC and then increase the speed target to Mach 0.8. Again, it's holding pitch mode. It's not going to go any faster because the pitch it was already using climb thrust, but it's just going to stay at climb thrust, level at 3 and accelerate smoothly up to Mach decimal 0.8. There's alt capture for flight level 380. So let's go back into my heads down mode here. We've got the rating to consider. It's still in climb thrust, but we'll leave it in climb because that extra little percentage will help it as it accelerates. What I do want to do is to go onto the transponder here, so I'm going to click the ATC1 line select key and tell the transponder, or the TCAS rather, to look below now, because I'm more interested in what's going on down below me than what's 4,000 feet above me. This will keep a reasonable window around the aircraft, but also looks down about 10,000 feet as well. You can see the aircraft is leveled and it's kind of catching up now. What I really want to know is whether I can fly faster and whether I've got the fuel to fly faster, what sort of an impact that speed change is going to have. The information on the ProLine 21 is all over the place really. You can get the information in a number of different ways. But the way I like to do it is to use the display menu down here. And you see my window. This is the window here. Notice it's driving the left side. It's the left side I'm interested in, MFD. So I'm going to cycle it from off to on. So Vnav on and off. It's on I want, and that gives me my landing fuel, or my predicted landing fuel, and the time that we're going to get to the destination. If I keep that up, let me just zoom in on here, because I know some people use it on, watch the videos on smaller devices as well, so we can see it on here as well. If I now go into performance, perf again, Vnav setup, at the moment it's doing a 0.8 cruise. I'm going to land at 9 minutes past 9 with 2.03 tons of fuel on board. Let's say that I want to do maximum cruise. I'll execute. So it's still in selected speed. It's still going to select 0.8, but now the calculations are based on 0.83, and that's going to cost me 600 or 700 kilos of fuel, but it's going to save me, what's that, 11 minutes. So it's really just what you feel is appropriate. If I want to see what going slower would do, I can put that in there and execute. Again, it doesn't slow down because I'm not in Vnav mode, but it's going to save me another 400 kilos of fuel at the expense of 30 minutes. So you've got a bit of flexibility in the Challenger there to go fast or go slow, just depending on what you want to achieve. It's useful to have the Vnav information displayed as well. On the real aircraft, they would tend to have the Vnav information on the pilot flying and the other information on the pilot monitoring. But for the sim, I find it more useful to have it the other way around. So display menu, select the right hand side, and the right hand side is set to Vnav. There's no constraints on these waypoints it's showing you. You can change some of the settings in here as well, but you've got a lot more control through the cursor panel on the display itself. Excellent. The one last thing you might want to do is, now you're in the cruise and you've got some displays set the way you want them, is the memory functions down here. Like a 1990s car stereo, if I push and hold on memory 3, there we go. If I hold it, you'll see it says store complete. I can then set essentially 3 view presets. So if I look at my upper menu again, let's put the upper menu, and I'll say that one of the useful things to have is the summary on the upper menu, and my lower format, well, let's say that I'd quite like to have PPAUSE for the first officer as well. Let's call that memory preset number 1, push and hold number 1. And then I can just swap between them with preset 3 and preset 1. And those will persist through the various different saves on your aircraft. Now all we've got to do is have a think about the ETOP stuff, chill out for a few hours, and then land at Glasgow. That's something for the next video. I hope you join me for that. As always, if you do have any comments or questions, please put them in the comment section, and I'll speak to you again soon. Thanks very much for watching.